Ed Burnam is an artist. He's a printmaker, he's an installation artist, and he's a faculty member at CPCC. You're going to love what he has to say about art, and more importantly, the artistic process. It's coming up next, right here on Charlotte Arts. By virtue of this show, I've been able to walk into many a studio, and it's that experience that helps me get a feel for who the artist is. Well, I've got to tell you, when I walked into the studio of today's guest, I was blown away. There's an incredible amount of thrust. There's an incredible amount of challenge in everything that you see on this man's wall. This artist's name is Ed Burnam. He's a printmaker, he's a visual artist, he's a lacrosse coach, and he's a faculty member at CPCC, and I'm thrilled to have him on the show today. Thanks for taking us in, Ed.
Well, thank you for coming in and providing some time for me to speak about my art.
Walking to your studio, and one of the first things that you see is this confrontation. It's not aggressive, but I would tell you that when I think about it, and I'll jump right to this piece that you put together called the Burnam family, that it is impossible to me to experience this without having a sense that you're trying to make the viewer see an experience that you've had. You want them to experience the art in a much different way than, say, because granted, and I think that the viewers are going to be able to see it, you could have just done a family portrait, but that was not your goal. It's a series of prints, and I'm going to let you take it from here, where you see the image shift from print to print. And it clearly has a commentary on what is happening to the people in the family portrait. Can you tell us a little bit about the piece and what you were going for?
There's two approaches to comment on that particular piece. One is as an artist and the other is as a teacher.
Okay.
I think it'd be more appropriate to say something about how I would teach through a piece like that before how I would create a piece like that. More often than not, one of the hardest things for young artists especially, and even old artists, is to find inspiration, right?
Sure.
And so when I give a student an assignment, an art assignment, whether it's in printmaking, drawing, or even if you were giving it to them in painting, a lot of times they don't know where to start. How do you start? Where do you get going?
Sure.
So they come back to you. If you ask them, I say, do something thematic. Do something that you could carry through this entire semester, which is only 3 months.
Sure.
You could continue to work on the same content throughout, the image content throughout, and develop that without spreading yourself too thin and all over and trying to focus on too many things conceptually. Right? So they often come back with third world concerns, from Africa, or they're branching off at some sort of humanitarian ideology, or they're just really trying to build something that has a lot of substance. The problem is they don't really have a relationship to that a lot of times.
Sure.
So there's a disconnect between what they want to do because they think that's the right thing to do, and the information and experiential information that they have, the academic information and the experiential information. So what I tell them to do is talk about in your art, in your visual language, right? When you're telling the story, talk about something you know something about.
Right.
And what do I know something about? My family.
Sure.
And so I can tell a cultural story through my experience with my family. That's much more powerful than if I was teaching a class at San Francisco State, which I have in the past, on American Indian history, and I'm giving you all this academic information that doesn't help you feel what I feel.
Right.
It gives you a lot of facts and dates, and it gives you a lot of, ideas about how historically these relationships. But if I show you something through my family, I think it makes it more personal and gives it a lot more power. And that is the commentary on that piece. It really says something about the seventh generation, which is a Haudenosaunee, which the people of the Longhouse, concept about doing what you do now for the seventh generation.
Right.
7 generations from now, which is a big concept.
So the visual aesthetic in and of itself, while it could be gratifying for you, you use the expression that you want the viewer, the audience, to feel what you feel. So for you, your art works at its best when it is ultimately evocative of some emotion that I don't know if it's fair to say that you want transmitted, or you simply want it to draw from the viewer. In
1999, I went back to Vermont College to get my second master's degree,
right,
and my MFA. And at that time, the faculty at Vermont College pushed me towards something I wasn't comfortable with, which was installation work, as opposed to just doing printmaking and bookmaking, which I really loved.
Right. A little bit more conventional for the average viewer. In fact, I would almost bet that the best thing I can do for you right now is, before we move too much farther, tell us what installation work is as you talk about how the faculty moved you toward it.
Well, installation to me is creating environments for shared experience.
Okay.
So instead of just hanging a print on the wall, what I've done with the piece, the Burnam family piece, what you're talking about, is it has 7 red chairs,
right,
7 prints, and the prints sort of change as they progress from beginning to end.
Sure, as you look left to right.
Now, it's not just one print hanging on the wall that you look at, contemplate, dismiss. There is something more coming into your environment. It forces you to interact, I think, more with what is going on, and it's a little bit harder to sort of just spend a second on it, walk away to the next piece. Now, that's just a simple version. I've built schoolhouses on the Vermont College campus with desks in them to talk about Indian boarding schools.
Right.
So you had to walk into this environment. You had to sit at this school desk, and you had to experience some of the visual information that I put in there.
Right.
It creates a more ephemeral sort of experience for the participant, the viewer. In 2000, I did a piece on AIDS about my cousin James Abrams, he passed away during my residency while I was working on this piece, and the piece morphed during the time. I kept changing the piece as his transformation from life to death became more and more apparent with every phone call I'd make back east.
Right.
And the piece actually was a reflection of, 1, my feelings towards what was happening to him, and 2, his actual body sort of transforming. It was a rubber room. It was kind of morphing out. The weather, it was an outdoor piece. It was working. So, and people were going into this, and one of the things that I don't think I ever contemplated about installation work was people bring their own experience to it.
Okay.
So it would invoke something in them. Not too confrontational, but maybe a little confrontational. But a lot of times people would walk out of there with tears in their eyes, which in the beginning I didn't understand, because I don't think I didn't build in for that.
Right.
I just wanted to express what I felt about, certain historical, academic, and contemporary issues that I was sort of working on and have worked on. It just is something that happened as a byproduct of that work.
As you explain installation to me, and this could be a flawed perception of it, I would think if it was more theatrical, it might cross the line over into what we call, performance art.
Yeah.
But you maintain a faithfulness to the visual experience, even though it might take 3 dimensions. It might take sitting in the desk in this classroom to ultimately evoke the concept that you were trying to invoke. You go back and you say, well, you weren't comfortable. It's because you'd never done it before.
Maybe push isn't the right word, but the job of a teacher is to challenge a student.
Sure.
So, and when you get to the level of the masters, the job of the teacher is to challenge you harder, out of your comfort zone. Push is a word, because maybe you're not necessarily resisting what they're pushing you towards, but they're continually trying to throw obstacles in your way and watch you solve those problems. Yeah. If they think you're too comfortable, you're not working hard enough. It's like that way with an athlete, it's that way with an artist, it's that way in anything you do, I believe. And when you're teaching, if you look at something, if I look at you and you're my student, and I see that you're doing beautiful images, well, I can continue to pat you on the back for those beautiful images, or I can figure out a way to move you off your comfort zone and maybe discover something that you would never discovered if you stay there.
Right.
Right. And so that's what that master's program, that MFA at Vermont College helped me understand is if you don't adventure into the scary, you're never going to discover the unknown about yourself and see what it is you can have the potential to create. If you're a writer, the first draft of your paper is never the best.
Of course not, yeah. And in fact, I'd have to paraphrase, Anne Lamott said you can't be afraid to write crap. Of course, it was a little bit more vivid, but it's true.
And at CP, we have great students there. I mean, I really enjoy, I've taught at other schools, and I really enjoy the students' enthusiasm there. But just like any other student, art student, they are totally in love with their work.
Sure.
And that's a hard thing, it's a hard thing to tell them that's not that good. It could be good. The concept is good. Your work ethic isn't bad. But if you stop right now, if you are afraid to, in printmaking, let's say, and I showed you the plates over here, you can see there's plates around the room. In printmaking, you can do that first plate, you can develop that first plate, and they print it. And it's just like being in a photography class for the first time when the image comes up out of the developer and you get very seduced by that. And you're like, oh my God, that's beautiful. And so, the first time they pull a print off of that plate, oh my God, it's beautiful. I mean, this is an instant sort of thing. Now that my job in the printmaking class is to come in and say, that's great, make 5 of those and continue to work on that plate. That's scary because they have to adventure into the unknown from a place that they found that's comfortable. So really, that push that we're talking about is using all of the knowledge that I have about what is possible to get them to that place, to push them to get them to that place. They don't have a lot of forevision for what is possible. They're students. I mean, who does?
Life brings a lot of that to you. Experience within the art does. Would you agree with this statement that comfort for an artist is a nice place to rest, but you don't want to take your mail there? Because ultimately, you might find yourself doing the same thing over and over and over again. It becomes rote.
Well, comfort is the death sentence for creative process.
Yeah.
I mean, then you become formulaic. I mean, it becomes a formula that you do. You might as well go to, one of these hotels and buy one of these starving artist sale things where, people are manufacturing things like an automotive plant.
Sure.
And so it's void of soul sometimes when you're looking at it. It's not just about putting images out, it's putting images about that have emotional content, that have human content, that tell a story, that have a message. That's the challenge in it. If you stay in one place, you're telling the same story over and over and over again, and maybe maybe it'll pay your light bill, I don't know. But it certainly doesn't challenge you as a creative entity.
There are 2 well-known regional artists here who've created a very handsome living for themselves. But in effect, they've been reproducing the same piece of work in a slightly different visual form for decades.
But they do
and
beautifully.
And they do, and you can't knock that. But by the same token, I wonder, what's the last time they got up and said, wow, I've never done this before. I'm a little scared.
They've taken themselves to a place that is very traditional. And to a certain extent, I love that work. I love their ability to make that Renaissance type visual work.
Yeah.
And I wish my students had more of a knack to push themselves, to discipline themselves, because I do believe discipline equals freedom. And in terms of content, sometimes those artists are more like illustrators because they use all of those talents to express other people's ideas.
Yeah, fair enough.
And that's okay because they need to make a living. They do an incredible job at that stuff. And that's okay for them. They're not my students.
Sure.
So, they're established artists. They found their niche. They found their place. They do an unbelievable job at what they do. And I certainly enjoy, their work around town and in different places. And I would wish that my students would push themselves more formally to become able to express themselves. And now, you know, in terms of content, you know, you never seen these guys, you never seen their sketchbooks at home.
Sure.
You know, I mean, there's where you're going to look.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we see the stuff that is commissioned. I'd love to see the sketchbooks at home. I'd love to see the more personal drawings, and I'm sure you would see things there that would unfold in front of you. And you know, and so there is a discipline there that I admire. I mean, I believe you said, you know, when you came in to the studio, I forget where you said something
sort of thrust
or confrontation or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever that is. You know, one of my teachers, Larry Thomas, is an incredible artist. His aesthetics are incredibly beautiful, and I'd always admired his work. So I believe that, you know, your ability as an artist to formally represent yourself visually, that's important, because without that, you can't hold the attention of people. If you're just throwing something up there, you're kind of almost disrespecting, I think, the viewer, the you know, the person that's looking at it. I think it was at the Biennale at the Whitney. It must have been in 2002, right around there. I was up with a friend looking at it, and the curator decided to use all these young skater artists, basically graffiti artists. And there was a lot of very good stuff, artists that I went to school with in San Francisco.
As you were surveying the gallery, the show, and you saw this stuff, was your first thought, filler? Remember, for, you know, if you a great album from the 70s, you got 8 great songs and 4 filler. Was it because it had some kind of a visual flash, but nothing beyond that? I mean, or
I think
political connections?
You know, there's good and bad art, no matter how you assemble it, no matter who does it. And if you don't take the time to really contemplate, execute, plan, discipline yourself, it's not going to be good. I mean, and the viewer's going to see that, and they're going to dismiss it quickly. And the appeal of that work that is sloppy, untaken care of, it'll have a very small audience. It'll reach a very small, even shock art, that kind of thing. You know, you go to these schools. You know, you go to different schools that are art schools, and you know, the freshman class usually just wants to do something shocking. And it's a big yawn, because it's like, okay, we've seen that from every single class for the last 30 years. It's not fresh, it's not new. Why don't you do yourself a favor and settle down, discipline yourself a little bit, develop your content through, you know, your ideas, through what, you know, reading, inference, whatever you do to develop your intellect, and then express that intellect and that emotion through your abilities, whether it's photography, painting, printmaking, new genre, you know, performance art, installation art. All of those require a visual discipline and an ability to execute. And if you don't have that, it's pretty evident to people most of the time. You don't need an art degree to know what's good art or bad art.
I agree.
Right? You don't need to be an enologist to taste sour wine or good wine.
That's a good point. Let's look a little bit about your educational track, because you took a bit of an unconventional turn. You got a BFA in printmaking, and then rather than to move still into more of a confined study of visual art, you chose ethnic studies. Tell us a little bit about that, why you chose it, and ultimately how it informed your art.
Well, the ethnic studies was San Francisco State. It was a degree that served a lot of my interests. You know, my dad is American Indian, and you know, grew up with a lot of Native culture in upstate New York. So, you know, so I've always around it. It was something that I believed, even at that point, like I've always believed, that my art had to have a certain amount of content that was real to me. So developing that academic track, historically, socially, going after that, allowed me to develop, you know, the content of my own work. Or my own base of ideas, really. Whether that expressed itself necessarily automatically in what I was doing visual, or it just served as a pool of information for me to draw off of when I was creating, you know, that's where it was. And, you know, it brought me into teaching. It brought me into teaching cultural studies, teaching American Indian history, you know, teaching ethnic studies, critical thinking, and exposed me to a whole group of students I would never have been involved with had I just tracked myself as an artist. And it allowed me to sort of understand, you know, worlds that I wouldn't have understood. So, I mean, I enjoyed that part of my teaching tenure. In 1998, I went back to school to get my MFA, which is a terminal degree.
Right.
It was either get PhD, which would have continued to track me academically as a teacher, or get the MFA, which would allow me to try to hopefully get a job teaching studio, which is what I do at CP.
Which is applied. It's you know, it has academic elements. It's essentially come in here, let's figure out if you can do this and how well, which is a great bridge actually to my next question, because you talked about the contemplative nature of an artist, that if someone was to come into your class, they're not going to be encouraged to throw a canvas up on a board and start drawing without having some concept, some idea of where they want to go before they touch that charcoal or that pencil to the canvas. And you said that's something that you really encourage your students to do. It's not entirely, you know, spontaneous and visceral, that there is an intellectual approach to it. Talk about what you do and how they react to that.
Particularly in printmaking, I mean, teaching drawing one, you have to have a certain amount of practice before you hit the playing field. So
says the lacrosse coach.
So in drawing one last semester, I had a lot of gifted students in a drawing one class. When you spend a lot of time doing these fundamental exercises to get everyone's skills up to par,
right,
and then you throw the assignments at them and see how they solve the problems. Last semester, you know, drawing one students, they did 2 6-foot-tall self-portraits within the context of the semester. Beautiful stuff. Cool. And you know, I think at the beginning of the semester, when you tell them these things, they, you know, this undaunting kind of, blah, blah, I can't do that. But once they start to gain confidence through the exercises, they understand that they are capable of a higher expression and doing less sort of menial tasking, sort of drawing still lifes and stuff. That's drawing. Printmaking, you don't have to necessarily be an incredible draftsman.
Right.
We get photography students in there. We get kids that are sometimes not even quote unquote artists. You scratch the plate, you certainly can do a Paul Klee.
Right.
Right? I mean, you can certainly just, you know, by scratching the plate, express yourself in some way. So the degree of formal training that comes into the printmaking class in terms of how to express visually is varied. So that's something you deal with in there. But what I give to all of them is, you all have the same formula to start with. During the semester, I want you to find something that you're interested in. And I want you to use that to inform your work, no matter what you do. And if you do 5 plates, 5 prints, or 10 prints by the end of the semester, the content has to be consistent. It has to be linked. It has to have a relationship to your experience, not mine or someone else's. We're not here to appropriate. We're here to create from our own experience. And so that's what I mean by, I guess, a long answer to that question, but that's what I mean by, you know, sort of challenge them with, don't just sit and scratch the plate or copy a photo, you know, just to see if you can recreate an image, because that's meaningless. Right. You know, anybody can copy something. Sure. But give me some ideas. Talk to me about those ideas. Let's kick them back and forth. You know, you do a little brainstorming with it. Let me help you develop that idea through constructive criticism, and then bring that back. And by the way, let's not spend too much time developing, because we do need to get to work. CP is very unique because I have a group of students who are chronic. I mean, they're there year after year. They're really a gift to the program because they are very mature artists. They're in their 60s and 70s, and you know, they are there, you know, day after day, week after week, and I push them like graduate students. They answer the call, and then they influence our younger students. So, you know, the community college, I think in that, it's a really great vision of how it works.
Ed, it feels like we just got started, but unfortunately we're out of time, believe it or not. But I want to thank you so much for talking about your art and your teaching. Gosh, what an asset you are, not just to the community, but to the college and to your students. Your work is vibrant and exciting, and it was a pleasure to meet you.
Great.
And I want to thank you for taking the time to tune in to Charlotte Arts, and we hope that you'll take the time to join us the next time that we get together and we talk to people here in our community that create a richer artistic landscape. Thanks very much, and we'll see you again real soon. Take care.